and welcome to the 45th Permaculture Masterclass hosted by the Permaculture Education Institute. My name is Morag. I'm hosting today, and I'm very delighted to be welcoming soon to this session two special guests for this evening, Rosemary Morrow and Rob Allsop. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm seated here today. I'm on the unceded lands of the Gubbi Gubbi, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And if you know the traditional custodians of the land on which you're seated, please go ahead and pop it in the chat below. So this session is focused, it's inspired actually by Rosemary Morrow and Rob Allsop's new book, published by Melliodora Publishing. So it's called The Earth Restorer's Guide to Permaculture. So this session we've partnered with Melliodora Publishing, the publishing house of David Holmgren, the co-originator of Permaculture, who have published this book. This book is published in Australia, printed in Australia. And so this is one of the many books that Melliodora Publishing prints. There's Retro Suburbia, 470. There's a whole number of different titles that are all permaculture books published here in this country. So thank you to Melliodora Publishing for offering to gift pack, which we will draw at the end of a number of the books, including this book as well. So my guests today, as I said, Rosemary Morrow and Rob Allsop. So Rosemary Morrow is an elder in the permaculture movement. She's been in the permaculture movement since the beginning and has taught around the world in some of the most dramatic places. And her works, the Earth User's Guide to Permaculture, the Teacher's Guide that corresponded with that, and then also now this is a revised edition of the Earth User's Guide with a whole series of new chapters and being completely reworked. Rob Allsop is the illustrator of this book, and 300 of his illustrations decorate the pages of this book, bringing to life a lot of the content which Roe is sharing. So it's my great delight to welcome them here today, and also to thank all of you for being here. There was well over 400 people who have registered for this session to join live, and also we're able to raise through your donations over $900, which will be sent directly 100% to refugee permaculture projects run by youth, designed by youth, led by youth, for other youth in places like Rwanda Refugee Settlement, Nakivale Refugee Settlement, places in East Africa where we have close relationships here at the Permaculture Education Institute. So without anything more, I will now open up the session, and I'm so delighted to be here with you and to invite our special guests. Well, welcome, Roe, and welcome, Rob, to our session tonight. It's such a delight to have you here. I know you've got an interesting little location going on there, Roe, with some mops near your head and some washing lines going on beside you. Where are you, Roe? Where are you seated at the moment?
I'm sitting on the veranda in a deep valley of a Girl Guide camp somewhere out of Wollongong near Mount Kira. And in the green door behind, there are 27 students who are doing teacher training, all moving furniture and getting ready for an evening session with Brenna Quinlan. And people do come in and out of that door a bit. So I'm on the veranda, and it's a little bit cool. I'm rugged up. I can see the stars. I'm out of doors and delighted to be here with you all. It's such a privilege and a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Ro. And I think the door's going to open.
I'd like to give
Sorry. Go ahead. You just cut out for a moment, so I jumped in. Go ahead, Ro.
Yeah, I'd just like to acknowledge that I live on Gundungurra country, where people maintain biodiversity, soil building, and clean water for 50,000 years. And that's something to copy and emulate. Sorry, I keep doing it. It's not a tick. It's one of the 27 or 28 coming out to dry tea bags. Okay, thank you very much. And Rob, it's lovely to see you again, and also the helpers on this. To everyone who's here, it's lovely to be with you tonight. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Rowe. And welcome, Rob. Rob is the illustrator of this beautiful book and was, I think there's something like 300 of your illustrations in this book. It must have taken an enormous amount of time to create those, and a very collaborative process with Rowe to actually identify what were the most important illustrations to include. So have you been working together a long time, Rob, or is this an you have, haven't you? You've worked together for many years, I understand.
Yes, look, thanks, Morag, and hello to everyone who's joined tonight too. Yes, look, Roe and I have known each other for a long, long time. I think it goes right back to about 1986, when I was doing some volunteer work for the Australian Trust for Conservation Volunteers, and Roe was helping coordinate that. And then I did my permaculture course with Roe in 1992. And after that, she asked if I'd like to illustrate her book that she was thinking of writing. And I accepted that. And so we've had that sort of working relationship as well as very strong friendship right back from, the early 90s and before that.
Wow, decades of collaboration. Yes. It's fantastic.
Yes.
So this book, Roe, is endorsed by the United Nations because we're in the UN decade on ecosystems restoration. What do you see as the importance of having this endorsement for a permaculture book, do you think?
I think it's really important for permaculture to start moving into working with like-minded organisations or organisations we can support. We have 50 years of permaculture on the ground, Morag, as you know, like your mum was a permaculturist. We know that permaculture has been around in India since the 70s, in South America, in Chile, and it's moved in Africa for years, let alone in Europe. So we have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of examples of permaculture across the world. So in this time of ecosystem restoration, where's the evidence of people who restore ecosystems? We restore the garden, we restore the food forest, we do regenerative farming, we restore forests, we maintain and extend Indigenous forests at the same time. We are a people who cover a wide range of restoration, and it seemed that there was something wonderful about a title that I'd always wanted and discussed with Rob that would coincide with this. But to get their endorsement, they had to read the whole text. It wasn't a simple thing. We had to send the whole text over when it's nearly written and get their approval. So they have endorsed it. And when you think about it, what other study anywhere in the world covers as many areas and is able to do or know restoration in so many fields? If I knew of one, I'd jump the permaculture boat and land in another because it was better and what we needed. So that was part of it. The other thing was, in the 1970s, Bill Mollison and David Holmgren got together and listed the global problems. Then they were called world problems in the first course. Put up early in the course, these are our problems, how are we going to solve them, and then led into permaculture. Today, the UN has got the planetary boundaries. They align almost perfectly like this with the world problems: clean water, reforestation, soils, air quality. You can just see that list. And there was something wonderfully prophetic and prescient about David and Bill listing those key topics there that are now planetary boundaries. So being able to unify the two is really important and come together. So we can go to the Sustainable Development Goals and find many we like. They can come to us for examples and evidence and schemes that work across a wide range of ecosystems and communities. That was a lot.
Well, I think it's a wonderful response, Ro, because, it's been a conversation that we've been having for a while, this idea about, how to link those two things. And I'm so excited that your book has been endorsed and that we're starting to get examples of permaculture on the UN website. I might just turn to Rob now and ask you, like, what drew you particularly to earth restoration work? I mean, if that's where you first met Rowe, what is it that turned in your heart or struck you that drew you into this space of earth restoration?
I think, look, I've always loved the bush and the environment, and that stems from my childhood. My brother has always been quite involved in environmental activities, and I was probably piggybacked on a few things that he did as well. But I think I just, for me personally, I think just the whole landscape and environment, bush and gardens and everything, I'm much happier outdoors than I am in. And I think over the years, like in the early days when conservation movement was happening, it was very hard. There weren't that many practical sort of avenues to go down to really feel you're engaging in doing earth restoration or giving a hand to the environment and returning it to its natural or its best condition. And I think permaculture was a real change for me when I saw that, because it linked, particularly doing it with Rowe, who has always had a very strong sort of environmental bent on everything she does with the natural regeneration of the bush. So it linked very nicely that sort of environmentalism and also growing food and culturally as well. And so I think the two went hand in hand the one went very well for me. And over the years, I guess I haven't been, in a sense, I haven't been that active out there in some ways. I've sort of been more in the background, maybe doing a little bit more on the education side, not so much teaching PDCs, but things like doing the illustration work. And
I think this is a really interesting point though, Rob, because I often hear people say, oh, I'm not doing much or I haven't done much, but the fact of like your illustration work bringing to life this, that people can read this anywhere in the world and see these examples, that's a huge contribution. And I think as permaculture educators, there's so many different ways that we can be educators, whether we're in the front or whether we're on the sides or whether we're supporting from wherever we can. There are so many places and roles for people all throughout permaculture, and it is about those collaborations too. So I think that's something for everyone in this room to really hear and to take on, because I really believe that the more we have people myceliating permaculture and sending out earth restoration messages into the communities and hosting things, organizing things, supporting other people, organizing things, the better we're going to be. So, whatever contribution we can make to step up in that role. So, Ro, it's kind of a bit of an obvious question, but I wonder what your take is on what you feel is the most important. My question is, why is being an earth restorer so important, do you think, at this particular time? I mean, permaculture has been talking about it forever, but what is it about now that really you want to call people to action to really step up at this point? What is it that you think is the edge of this conversation that doesn't get possibly talked about enough?
I think the edge is that systems support life are critically on the edge of collapse, and that the answers are usually green answers, environmental answers, not engineering answers. So that unless we are being absolutely sustainable in terms of high productivity and build soils, right? Really good yields and clean water, obtain crops and rebuild environments. This is all what permaculture teaches. Unless we are absolutely able to do those things and understand the more perennial the system, the better, because it can withstand global warming, then I think it's pretty hard to think with a good conscience for our children, or for me, for younger people who are inheriting this earth. So there's the whole conscience. There's protecting what I love desperately and feel is a gift and a mystery and a miracle to live on this planet. And then there's personal responsibility to work in whatever way I can, which is quite minor in many ways, to make things possible for others. And making things possible for others in whatever way we do, I think, is key. I think understanding permaculture's restoration gives it a clear definition for many of you who have struggled to perhaps to describe it. It's a restorative discipline that covers most areas of life. So I just think those things are all interwoven.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that, that idea of making things possible for others. So just opening it up, opening the doors. And it's really a lot about being in service. I mean, both of you, I know, have lived in many ways of being in service to life, being in service to communities, being in service to ecosystems. I mean, both of you have worked extensively in different parts of the world. I know, Rob, you spent a lot of time in Cambodia, and I know, Rowe, your work has taken you around the world, but I just want to start with Rob and ask you, how did that work influence how you saw permaculture?
Yeah, that's interesting, really. When I think of that, I did spend quite a few years in Cambodia and spent a lot of time in rural areas. I wasn't in the city at all. And I think I gained a great admiration for people who had to live on their own resources, basically. They didn't, there wasn't like a welfare system as such. It was really down to the village life and the extended family and the community in the village, and very little inputs from outside that. And I think that really left a bit of an indelible sort of mark on me, especially when I came back to Australia, when I saw how much we rely on outside resources to keep us going, in a sense, and how little we produced ourselves, in a sense, not just in food, but in our housing and everything. And that, I think that stayed with me. I always like to try and, what am I trying to say? I like not to be totally self-sufficient, but I like to be able to look after myself and not have to rely too much on others. In having said that, I think it's very important to be within the community, and perhaps that's something I'm exploring more now, is my place in the community itself as both a contributor and a receiver, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And I wanted to, Rowe, from all of the different places that you've been introducing permaculture, thinking and action and practice, where have you seen the most powerful impact of permaculture being able to be taken up as that restoration work and livelihood and food systems and like that community building, community enlivening? Where has it been most impactful, do you think?
So starting with the situation when I arrived, which was called by films and reporters Ground Zero. They said, this is it. That was Cambodia, and then later on it was East Timor. And so food systems had been destroyed, 2 million people killed, women were heads of households, and they weren't really often strong enough to pull the plough, which men had done. They were suffering an enormous amount of grief and trauma on several scores. There had been a civil war, which is always painful when families divide over issues and people are hurt. Everyone was carrying the most awful memories and images of what they'd seen happen when they were exposed. Food supplies were down, rats were rife, tribes of dogs were rife, and they were often I'm sorry to say this, but they were eating bodies. And there were skull houses. It was just one of those situations that people live through and recover and come back. But the hunger was one of the main things, and there was a need to kickstart food supplies again. Not that they didn't have the skills, but there was a change of thinking, of land, of ownership. There was destruction. There was that terrible tiredness you get from great sorrow and trauma and no time to pick it up. They'd been occupied by the Vietnamese, who weren't really sympathetic to people who let Khmer Rouge do that. Though Vietnam was another story of starvation and hunger, and also a civil war running under the occupation and the bombs that came in. So I think it was Cambodia. I think it was going to PERSAT and working with the women, teaching the women permaculture at a district level. So below that, you had communes and villages. So they had this structure. We, by luck, taught it a structure where the women could go to their districts. And then they had a system where, all right, all you women, everyone, come and listen to me. And they'd stand in the marketplace or under a house and say, you will do this. I've got the seed. You will plant it. You will make compost. You'll use these Coke bottles to collect water off your roof. You will make compost. I mean, it wasn't the way I taught them to teach, which is, would you like to do this? But it was the way they delivered, and watching people go from starvation. Takes about 3 months from real starvation, as in Eritrea or something, to get the food supplies turning over. So we had people at bus stations selling little extras. They may have made 10 cents a week in income, but that was perhaps another kilogram of rice for a school book. I think that kick off there, and then it went to Kampong Chhnang and Kandal and Viruveng, and it started to spread. In its way, it was a moment when the rest of the world was talking about sustainable living and sustainable agriculture, and it gave them a curriculum. When the government was in disarray, they couldn't speak English, they didn't have skills, people had been killed. So therefore, it gave them a body of knowledge that people working with rural people to create food could use. And people have said to me, even if you go back now, you can see they're still using the permaculture syllabus.
So in a way, that's like a, oh, sorry to interrupt, Roy. Yeah. I was just going to say it's something like a democratization of education around regeneration.
Yeah.
And it continues today. And I feel that that is such an important part of what permaculture offers into the world. And I wanted to pick up a bit of a thread around that trauma side of things that you've talked about, because both of the places that you've been to would have, you know, been deeply affected by that. And I know there's probably many people on the call today who are also in that situation. And we recently had a presentation at the Permaculture Educators program from someone who works and her husband's from Kashmir. And you might know her, Amber. I think you know.
I know Amber. Yes.
Yeah.
I taught the permaculture course for Green Kashmir.
Yeah. And so she's talking about working with the women there, and that she was often saying that the permaculture education wasn't going in quite as fast as they thought because there was this numbness, the trauma. But that through the permaculture education program, the connecting and the other things that were happening, there was some kind of healing that was going on. So there's these multiple layers that always exist within a course. I just wonder whether, you know, as part of this earth restoration, whether you've also seen this sort of human restoration and whether there's something deeply connected there that you experienced.
Yes, I think I've seen it where the civil war wasn't actually declared. So in East Timor, some people favoured the Indonesians, or the Portuguese being given back some land, or North and South Vietnam. When we bring people together in classes, we deliberately mix and remix and mix and remix. And they have that wonderful working together on a common objective or piece of information or task, and all that, suddenly the other stuff evaporates. It doesn't have to be discussed. It doesn't have to be faced. It doesn't have to be apologized. It just goes away.
So kind of side by siding, isn't it? It's rather than going face to face and doing a head on about it. You're doing some, that it's not a distraction. No. It's something other than that gives a whole new dimension. I've heard it so many times, and I'm sorry, were you going to say something?
Only it's a commonality that we share to build a future. And if you can have people doing that, and we also sometimes call permaculture the arts of peace, together with nonviolent communication and body behaviour. So we talk about the arts of peace in those conditions and relearning.
Can you say a bit more about that? Did you say the arts of peace or the art of peace?
Arts.
Arts
of peace. And some things are going to help a peaceful future, and other things might mean that the violence lingers too long and becomes destructive. So having permaculture goals is common if people understand it, and they can work and go together understanding they're working for a joint peaceful solution.
So I'm just going to come back around to your book, and I thought maybe at this point, maybe share some illustrations that Rob could speak us through, and then we'll come back to Rowe to talk about the new chapters that you've added into this and why it was that you felt it was so important that these new chapters be in your book. But let me just share the screen now. So Rob has shared with me a series of pictures, and I hope you can all see these now. Rob, take us away. Tell us about your hang on, I've gone too far. Let me go back to the start. Here we go. This one.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it doesn't matter which way they go, really, but they're in order of where they come in the book. Okay, this is an illustration that appears in, think about the second or third chapter when Rowe is talking about global challenges and the problems that you mentioned earlier on, and basically, it's a simple line illustration with no text apart from the title, and it's just a thought-provoking, or to get you thinking, basically. So the title of it, I think, is consumption or overpopulation.
Overconsumption versus population, the real issue. I know you're on a phone, so you can't actually see that.
I can't see the text.
No.
Yes.
Yeah, the real issue. Yeah.
Yeah. So look, it's this next one is that comes in the chapter of oceans, which is a new chapter which Rowe will talk about, and it's a slightly different illustration in the sense that it's more an information illustration. So there's a lot more text on it, and this one is about seagrass beds and the importance of them as an ecosystem and in carbon storage and sequestration. And this was one of my jobs, in a sense, was we weren't writing a marine biology textbook for university, and we weren't trying to dumb down the information, but trying to sift out what is it that people really need to know to get a grasp of what seagrass beds do and the importance of them. Mm-hmm. So this next illustration is actually of hedgerows in England, and it comes in the chapter on windbreaks and special forests. And it's an example of a type of special forest or windbreak that's been around for centuries now in England. And just, once again, no text on it. So it's one of those illustrations that I hope you just look at and you just keep seeing different things in it and maybe going, aha, yes, oh, yes. So it talks of, the living fences of weaving the branches together, the growing branches together to form a structure. It talks of the different sorts of plants, the shrubby herb plants that can be used as browse for animals. It's habitat for all the native animals, the rabbits, the little ones, the hedgehogs, the foxes, all of them. It's a very diverse habitat for wildflowers, so it's lots of beneficial insects, little birds. It acts as a windbreak, of course, but also it was a source of food, foraging for the people, for the farmers as well, when the berries and things are ripe. So there's a lot encompassed in that illustration.
And I love the fact that, you could just show this picture as you're teaching a class or working with a group of people and just open up conversations about so many different things. I think that's fantastic. And here's the fourth one. We have two more to go. So tell us about this one.
Well, this is, I guess, another type of illustration. It's not so much how to do illustration, but it was an example of a plan of a permaculture design in a refugee camp for a very, very small tent or container dwelling. And this is based on Rowe's experience and what she can see, what you can aspire to see happening or develop in a situation like a refugee camp.
And it's quite a dramatic difference there, what you're showing. Maybe
yes.
Maybe Rowe can talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We have one more slide here.
Yeah, and look, I guess as I'm drawing an illustration, I'm always thinking, what's the value of this? What are people going to get out of this? Is this just a pretty picture, or is this actually describing something in the text or showing something more than that's in the text? This borders on the pretty picture side, but I guess it comes in the chapter on bioregions. And it was really, it was just, I was trying to get a sense of what a cohesive small community can look like when it works well together. So it was really remembering all the best things that I could remember of villages that I worked in Cambodia, and all the things, be it growing your own food, houses made out of local materials, very self-sufficient. There's a Wat, a Buddhist temple there, which was very cohesive in the community and served a great deal in communal welfare too for people. So it sort of encompasses all those lovely things about a community in a bioregion.
Thank you, Rob.
There's nearly always a duck somewhere.
So the book, as we said at the start, is just full of Rob's illustrations, which are rich stories in themselves, describing so many of the different principles and ideas that Rowe has expressed throughout the text. And I know I've looked at those illustrations in your previous books, and it's been absolutely rich and wonderful. And there's so much extra new parts of this book, Rowe, that I wanted to maybe just touch on that. There's things like, as Rob mentioned, oceans and more around the edges and crowded places. Do you want to just speak to a few of the new parts of your book and why you felt it was so important to put them in? Because I love this idea of expanding the field of permaculture as we go and as we learn.
Well, in nearly 40 years of teaching teaching permaculture and being able to experience so many different environments at a fundamental level, I've got some degree of feeling what could be needed. And, we do a needs analysis. I was almost thinking through a needs analysis to do this book. So in the 1970s, when permaculture started, it was absolutely forward thinking. And we still hang on to that core today. It doesn't need changing. And I'm often staggered at how the things that David and Bill thought of are still true, only the evidence has grown for them. Where once we might have questioned them, for example, air quality, today we know about air quality in Athens, in Delhi, in Dhaka we know about air quality and its danger. We also know when we talked about ventilation in houses, we know now with COVID, we always need good ventilation, should be built into our designs. So I guess there were certain things that seemed to me to consolidate and support some of those early things that were barely mentioned. The new chapters were those that normally I'd have written or phoned Bill and said, can I do this? I wonder if you're all aware of how important we are now understanding that oceans are. It's not just marine permaculture. They are huge forests. They're deep wells. They have minerals. We know that the currents and the air, so here's the ocean, the air-ocean interface is what decides El Nino, La Nina, the Indian Ocean dipole. We know that the ocean can only take so much CO2 without going into collapse. All that was not known clearly at that time. It was suspected because the Gaia hypothesis was working on what the oceans were doing with CO2. We didn't really take it in that the oceans absorbed as much CO2 as all the forests. We just thought trees produce CO2. So what we've come to is a new understanding of that 70% of the world, all of which is being damaged from 30% of the land. So we've got this huge 70% area with the rubbish and the boats and the pollution all coming off the land. So my feeling was that every permaculturist needs to ask, how is what I'm doing and teaching going to affect oceans? Even if you're 3,000 kilometres inland, it will eventually reach the sea in time because all water goes back to the oceans. So what we need to do is understand more about the oceans, be more careful about what escapes, but also we need some really good techniques for coastal areas and islands. And we haven't got them. We don't know. But we do know if you live on a place and the ocean is responding to human behaviours and pollution, then the ocean responds and it comes up and the glaciers melt. So I've been absolutely frank in the book. We've talked about the importance of estuaries, the importance of Rob's drawings, the importance of seagrass, of what all those forests in the ocean are doing and why they're critical, because that's for the bigger view of a permaculturist for everything we do. And we also have to look at coastal areas. So I've tried to zone a port and a port city, which are filthy and polluting, and the boats and the trucks they are, and give a couple of good examples. Then zone coastal areas right through to we have national parks on the coast. Know what zone you're in, know what to do and what's appropriate to your permaculture. So it's about mangrove forests in the tropic, maybe casuarina forests in another area. It may be preserving dunes. Understand your environment, know where to intervene and what needs to be done. I think we have sadly underestimated the marine impacts, and we are finding it very hard to pull back on those, apart from the fact it's the next planetary boundary to go, and that will be very unhappy.
So, Rowe,
that's one chapter.
Thinking about the oceans, let's just stay on the oceans for a minute, and thinking about what's happening with the glacial meltwaters, the Thwaites Glacier ice shelf, about to collapse. Have you addressed that in the book or in your work in terms of thinking about what happens on the edges of society when sea level rise hits? What do we do with those urban areas that are all coastal? What kind of future should we really be thinking about in terms of building resilience for humanity in these places? And we've currently, while we're speaking, most of huge swathes of Pakistan are underwater. The scale of the impact that we're seeing right now and that we're going to continue to see How do you see permaculture being able to step up in a way to respond to that level?
I think we have to work with bigger organisations. The best place for most people to work is with local government, and if possible, a permaculture design for a local government area, protecting its boundaries. And I think resilience, which is in my book, but I'm sorry, I think it's done, because the time between disasters is too short, and there's a big chapter on disasters. If you look at the people in a town in New South Wales, first they had a drought, then they had a mouse plague in Canterfield, then they had a flood, then they had a flood, then they had COVID, and COVID tore them apart because they were then locked away from each other. So they didn't have time to recover. I think resilience under those conditions, I saw it with starvation in Ethiopia, was finally wears people out and they become passive. So I think we have to work closely on local government areas. I believe we have to look hard now at this other word, which is not resilience, because it's too hard, but adaptation. So how do we adapt to write our own? Yes, there was a bushfire there too. Yeah. People will have to do their own research and raise their own alarms, because governments cannot always help in time. For places like Portugal, they've lost nearly all their forests, and those forests had been pine forests planted 500 years ago, and most people thought they're indigenous. In effect, they were pork forests. Their best adaptation is to find the early varieties of oak forests and put them back with the associated vegetation. A permaculture design over an area is probably your strongest adaptation and buffer that you can get. So we have to work with our communities, and we have to perhaps be more active. Slow and small solutions are fine, but once you've got it, they may have to scale up fast. So let's take the example of revegetating an area and doing seed balls. You know, that nice bit of manure and soil that's going to germinate only when there's enough water, and in it you've got 2 seeds and we throw them out. I would love to see governments now scattering those right across hillsides and barren land from helicopters. And then when the next rain comes, whatever germinates, germinates. I think slow and small solutions, but once we have the solution, scale up, scale up, scale up where it works. For the melting glaciers, I can't see much except to save lives, which would be equipping people with really first-rate communication systems, because they're often in small valleys and things when the waters melt and come down at night, and there've been no warnings. The other thing is start planning now. What is going to take out the great rice deltas of the world, the Irrawaddy, the Mekong, those, we need to concentrate on bringing more food back to other areas and understanding what to grow urgently. Adapt, adapt, adapt to a different world. We're not going back to normal. In fact, people used to talk about going back to normal with COVID, but it could not be the same. Things have changed. And for us, adaptation through really good analysis and design could be enormously helpful. And bring your designs to the guide and to the eyes of those who make decision makers, and work with those who are making good decisions, not as missionaries, but as supporters. Along that line, the United Nations program that we worked on, Morag, we now know how to get your projects up there. It was the Sustainable Development Goals. There is a website, and we need every permaculture project we can get up there, swamp them with thousands to show the evidence is there for some part of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm talking too much.
No. I was just wanting to jump in there to say that, Rowe, I think possibly what we need to do as a follow-up from this session is to spread that document that was created of how to do that, and the information of how to do that as far and wide as possible, to see if we can get that flooding of permaculture type examples out into that world where people are looking for solutions so that the permaculture solutions are seen. And I also think what you're saying too about the adapt and going for bioregional solutions as opposed to just backyards. Like, we need to get our house in order, but we also need to be able to think a bit bigger and cross boundaries that possibly we haven't crossed before. And I think that's what you're saying. Work with different organizations. It doesn't mean giving up what you believe in. It just means opening up doors. Where are the new edges of the collaborations that we can begin to explore and to really dive into that? And it'd be surprising actually where you can find. So, this is what I feel is the role of, the permaculture practice, the myceliation of, permaculture education. And so people keep redefining. It's not about just teaching the same course over and over. It's like adapting permaculture to your local place, to your local context, to whatever room that you enter into, so that you have the possibility for translating the permaculture thinking into that new context. And so, we really need to have all of those people whose permaculture is in their elbows and their knees out there speaking up to the highest level of capacity that they have. And I mean, one word I was using, I don't know if you like this particular word, maybe there's another word you can think of, but this idea of having permaculture ambassadors, people who are going out and speaking up and doing this kind of work of gently and diplomatically putting these solutions, this evidence in front of a whole swathe of people who've not yet seen it and who get absolutely surprised when they see it and go, well, why haven't we heard of this before? I thought permaculture was that kind of hippie gardening thing, and I think it's a really big shift that we need to grow up into this sense of what it is the permaculture global movement and the global learning community is.
I think for a long time, we haven't, and we still don't have, a permaculture media that reports on local government practices from a permaculture viewpoint, from government practices, from company practices. Most people have a political, environmental, something reporter. We need to have a permaculture. When they say we will green Northern Australia, we need a permaculture reporter can say, you do that and you'll destroy the climate in India. Or we need people to report on permaculturally what could happen and then what the disaster and then how it can be avoided. I think the value of permaculture is that we're operating at so many levels. We haven't got a single answer, we've got multiple answers, everything from windbreaks to grow your own food, everything from how to market to a local economy. And it's this range that enables us to have strengths, but it's harder for people to get hold of. But if we had a really terrific media reporting in there, they've always got the microphone up there. Excuse me, Minister, can you comment on? That's what we need, right up there at front with the rest of them.
Maybe that's also the youth. My daughter Maya, who heads up the Perma Youth, is currently in the Queensland Youth Parliament, actually in Parliament House in Queensland for the next few days, making bills, speaking with ministers, getting the training, and then speaking out on radio. Maybe it's that. Maybe all of us who are here, who are kind of elders in the movement, need to find more and more ways to support young practivists who have that energy and that capacity and the deep commitment, because it's their future too. It's something that they feel so deeply. And the other option is apathy, like you were saying before. That's the other option. It's like, sticking your head in the sand and ignoring it and hoping that we'll go back to normal soon. What other option do we have? Really, there's not a whole lot of ways which we can move. But there is a spectrum of ways we can move forward, but it feels like you're either ignoring it or you're stepping in and saying, yep, I'm in for this and I'm going to take a ride. Rob, I realise I haven't asked you a question for a while, and I'm sorry about that. But I wanted to maybe ask you about, as an illustrator, when you're hearing Rowe and I chat around like this, what ways can you see, illustrative works be able to help, these reports or these getting the word out more effectively rather than, writing just an article? Or what do you see? What comes into your mind when you're hearing all of this as an illustrator, as an artist?
First of all, I'm scared what Ro's going to ask me to draw next. Yes, one thing is how to make these illustrations available for everyone. And also, one of the things that we tried to do in this book was to make it more global. So make the illustrations more readable by people in other cultures and other lands. Whereas the earlier versions were very much based in sort of a Western, like more Australian sort of context. We tried to broaden that a little bit. We give examples from different continents. And having said that, I think it'd be impossible to make one book that satisfies every culture and everything. But I'd be really happy for people to copy these illustrations in a sense, or the concepts of these illustrations, and draw them in their own cultural context that their own communities can really read very easily and understand. And I think that would that goes a long way to spreading or making these illustrations more useful in a wider context, just the English-speaking world in a sense.
I can imagine that would be really helpful for a lot of the refugee communities that I know that I work with as well, to be able to have that more clear visual representation of the ideas that they can then contextualize. And I think that's really wonderful. I'm also just really aware of the time, and I haven't invited anyone from the audience to ask us any questions. And I'm sure that there would be. There's been lots of comments going in the chat, and thank you for that, and keep doing that. And I also wanted to let you know that if you want to save the chat so you can pick up any threads that people have done, in the bit where you type your little chat, there's 3 dots on the edge. And if you click on those, I don't know if you've ever done this before, but the very top thing says save chat. So rather than having to jot down everything, at the end, you can, before we shut off, you can just save chat, and there you've got your own copy for all the links. But I wanted to ask if anyone wanted to ask a question of Rowe or Rob, to put your hand up, and just like Nina's done. Hi, Nina. Down the bottom, there's a spot where you have reactions, and so you can click that, and it gives you a little hand, and it pops you up to the top of the screen so I can see. With over 140 people here, it's easier for me to notice who's wanting to speak, and so I can bring you in. The other thing that I wanted to do too was to let you know that we will be selecting someone to be the prize winner of Rowe's book and a bundle of Melliodora books as well. So Lucy's here somewhere in the audience from Melliodora Publishing. So hello, Lucy, and she has the books ready to send out to whoever our winner is. So maybe while we're asking questions, I might do a little bit of a random pick of who is the winner. But go ahead, Nina. Stacey's going to spotlight you so you can come and join us. There we go. Hello, Nina. Welcome.
Hi everyone. Thanks, Morag, for gathering us here. And my question is for Rowe and for Robert. For Rowe is in the future. Let's think, Rowe, you are the fairy of change. How it would be the perfect world, or the perfect city, or the perfect neighborhood? How it could be for you in the way of governance and community, and if you might have like a currency there, how it might be this perfect world. And for Robert, my question is about activism. If is in his trajectory, from his perspective, he thinks activism have been like key in try to escalate permaculture, or not. Like how important is to have a permis involves in activism, trying to make some noise and trying to be like intruders in different like layers of society. How have been your experience, Robert? And Rowe, please, Fairy of Change.
Very good, Mother.
Help us to reimagine this
Thanks,
like
Nina.
perfect future. Thanks.
Big questions. I wonder how far we can go. So, Ro, you're a reimagining of the entire world through your eyes. What do we need to do?
I thought it was going to be a perfect community. It's going to be the one that Nina creates herself. She moves out and she gets on with, and everyone thinks this is fabulous, we can run with it. We've got lots of models on the ground, but it's going to be the one you create, and I'm not getting out of it. I just really think you'll do a fabulous job. Over to you, Rob. Activism?
Activism. Yeah, look, that's interesting. I mean, activism's played an enormously important role in saving particular environments. I mean, I'm thinking back to the Franklin River campaign, which was probably my first involvement in any activism. From a permaculture perspective, maybe it's just I see examples and sort of really good working examples that everyone can see and perhaps participate in or get benefit from as maybe being somehow more well, I can't quite sort of see activism and permaculture. I can't put them in the same sentence in a sense at the moment. Sorry, Nina. As I say, like activism certainly for certain issues and certain environmental issues, but in a general permaculture sense, I see more by example, I think, of what we can create or what we can do that people can see and participate in and perhaps like learning and emulating themselves in their own communities.
Thanks, Rob. The Perma Youth call it practivism, practical permaculture activism, that actually doing that is a form of activism.
Yeah.
Ro, go ahead. You were going to say something.
I was, because I've had a chance to think about Nina's question. I had that delay moment while I was sort of considering it. Nina, I'd look at care of the earth, care of people, redistribute surplus to need and reduce consumption. Then I'd set up a series, and actually I've made this table. I think it's in the book, but the book's so big I've forgotten what I wrote, some of it. And in it I've provided a table of indicators showing we're getting there. So you would find under care of people, everyone's in a home. Under care of people, everyone has an income. Under care of people, access to land. Under care of the environment, regeneration of forests, regeneration of coastal lands, regeneration of wetlands and waterways. Under redistribution would be no huge companies, no monopolies. So what I've tried to do is actually list the indicators that would tell any society if they were getting anywhere close to a perma paradise, which I think is what you're asking about. And it would also do to sit and check off at some time how good your community was. So it could give you a checklist. I think it's quite realistic. And you could go through it. I'm sorry I didn't answer properly at first, but I've got a sense that I'm one of the oldest permies around, and people like you are going to carry it forward. So
the other thing that I wanted to just mention in there too is this sort of, shifting our thinking from either being about dystopia or even utopia. And there's this new term called throughtopia. What are the kinds of stories that we need to be telling as a community and globally? And what are those stories that we tell to, in the councils, in wherever we find ourselves, that are those stories of adaptation, those stories of how are we going to get through? We don't know what's coming, but we know how we can work together to do that. So if we think about it less of being a thing of a final destination of, that's the kind of the golden end point like, what is an endpoint? There is never any endpoint. We're always working towards something. It's a process. So let's think about how we can really deeply engage with this process of creating permaculture through utopias that connect us and engage us and find new ways forward for restoring the earth. I noticed that it's 8:02 my time. We have one more hand up. So if you all don't mind just sticking around for a few more minutes, we'll bring Christopher in, and then we'll draw the book prize, and also mention a few more notices before we close up. Okay. Welcome, Christopher. You're on mute, just so you know. No. Can't hear you, Christopher. You'll need to. It's not working, is it? I'm sorry, Christopher. We might have to see if you can ask it in the chat. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, finally got it. Yeah, got it. I'll be very quick. Thank you very much, Roe, for sharing your wonderful experience and knowledge. It's really regenerating in and of itself. But in regards to what you were talking about in regards to activism, I think it's importantly you can focus on doing what I think or have referred to as a major rethink, not just so much on an individual level, but rethink what are you as an individual doing in regards to what are the environmental consequences of what we eat, drink, purchase, and do. What effects do those activities have on yourself and the planet and also your local community? And importantly, who are you working for and what is their intention? Accordingly, what is your intention? So that's like activism in vitro, basically. And you lead by doing so, you lead by example. That, I think, is a very exponentially natural way of growing activism.
And a fun way to live.
Exactly. I call it the coddywomple. Too many people are focused on the destination. It's the journey. You have a vague destination in mind, but you finally get there. You always end up where you're supposed to be. So that's, in that sense, look up the dictionary. I love the word coddywomple. You head out for a vague destination, but you enjoy the journey and you rethink and do accordingly. That's healthy activism in and of itself, I think.
Thank you, Christopher. And thank you for joining in. That's a new word for me. I'm going to go and look it up afterwards. Well, we're coming to the end of our session now, and I would really love to thank Rosemary Morrow and Rob Allsop for joining us for this fantastic session today. I hope you've all got a lot out of it. I can see that in the chat, Stacey's just shared with you the links to the Permaculture Education Institute, but also to the Ethos Foundation. All of these events that we run are always free, and any of the donations that you make go 100% towards supporting refugee permaculture projects that are designed by refugees, led by refugees, and most often run by youth as well, young women, in fact. And so if you feel like you have some extra spare cash, to throw that way, there's the link. Also, Lucy from Melliodora, if you'd like to drop in any links there too about how to get a hold of this book, because the Earth Restorer's Guide is definitely something that you need to have if you're going to sit around with your communities and start to share and map out and work out what you're going to do. And if you're going to step up as a permaculture practivist or permaculture, what was in there? A permaculture parliamentarian? Minister for Permaculture, I think someone wrote. Yes, why not? Why not? I think that's perfect. I'm going to go and tap on my daughter's shoulder. I'm going to go and visit her in the opening tomorrow, opening of Parliament at the sitting week, and say, Minister for Permaculture. Apparently, very generously, Melliodora Publishing has offered a 15% discount for anyone who wanted to buy the book. So there will be a link for that I'll share out with an email follow-up for this too. So if you'd like to get the book, we'll send you that discount code. And finally, the person what I did was I scrolled through the participant list. This is the best that I could do because we have over 400 people who registered, but the prize was for someone who turned up today. So I flicked through and I kind of randomly put my finger on, and that person is Liz Morrigan. Is Liz here? Liz, let's just...
Yeah, Bar, that's amazing.
Hey, Liz.
Oh.
Congratulations, Liz. We'll get those books sent out to you very soon.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Melliodora, too. And Ro, thank you so much. You're bringing tears to my eyes.
Oh, wow.
I started off with tears when you started talking, and now I'm in tears again. Thank you.
Oh, look after yourself, Liz. We'll send you that box of books soon. Congratulations. Well, thank you, Ro, from the bottom of my heart, and thank you, Rob, from the bottom of my heart, for taking time to be here with us today and for sharing just such beautiful insights into your world and your thinking and your art, and for taking time out of your Train the Trainer program. I know you've got a room full of people who are waiting for you back behind that moth wall behind you. And thank you we heard all the frogs singing along with you before, which is really lovely.
When they stop, they're singing up the rain, and we've had enough.
Yes. So the jacket is because Ro is actually sitting outside in the cold in the evening, and we deeply appreciate you taking the time to come and join us here. So thank you, both of you, and thank you to all of you who are here. And thank you to Melliodora, who's partnered in this event as well. We really appreciate your participation as well. All right, everyone, have a wonderful evening, day, morning, wherever you're calling in from, and we'll see you again next time.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Morag.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Morag.
Bye.
Bye. Love you, Rowe. Love you, Morag. Love you all. Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Bye.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Love you.
Nina. You'll be in my position one day. Look out. That's a warning.
Thanks, everyone. I'll catch you next time. We'll send you the recording and an email with the follow-up links and things. So watch out for that in your inbox. Hi, Meg. Hi, Graham. I can see you now.
Hi. Love you.
Love you too. All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye.